generally never less than 2, is my understanding, and some of the better oaks that people pay more money for, they actually set those trees out in the wild, out in open exposure to all of the weather for 3 years. And at times they'll rotate them. So the ones that were on the bottom of the ground, they were kind of shaded from the sun. They probably had more moisture and humidity in there. They'll rotate those up to the top of the batch, and they'll work their way through a few different times. Now, the magic of what happens there and why this is important, and this is also why you can't go to Home Depot and buy a red oak board or a white oak board, take it home and toast it up and be good to go. It's actually when the microfoil, the lichen and those types of little things that we see growing on rocks and trees out in the forest when we wander around, those guys will attach themselves to this wood, and then they'll sink their roots down in there, and then they start to create their own enzymes that they're sending down inside this wood so that it turns, I don't know what their enzymes do, but I'm assuming it's helping to make that wood become a more viable life source for these lichen and whatnot.
Yeah, typically lichen is trying to break down whatever they're hosting, whatever they're on.
That's right. That's right, and that's sure. And so that's why we find old trees that have laid in the forest forever. They turn to punk, or you know what I mean. They're
essentially
so these lichen are doing. That's right. Yeah, they're trying to make they're trying to make their house, and they're trying to squeeze the food out of their house the way that they like it, and so they've actually found that this process, this seasoning process that goes on for generally 2 or 3 years, is really what makes some of a huge portion of the flavor profile in these different woods. And there's actually some companies now that are cutting French oak down in France, putting it on a boat, and they're shipping it here to America. and now these guys have French oak sitting in their lots in America for 3 years, and then they ship them back to France, and then vice versa. We're taking some of our American oaks and shipping them over there, because the environment that they're at and the different lichen species and whatnot actually has a huge impact on the overall way that the oak presents once the coopers get a hold of them and turn them into barrels and chips, staves, all that kind of thing. And then another reason that they're different one to the other is the toast levels. So generally they have a light, a medium plus, and a heavy toast. I guess you could probably find some if you looked hard enough, or ordered them where they're actually charcoaled some to the outside. Now one of the components inside of all of these different oaks is lipids, and so let's think about lipids as being a sugar, like a glucose inside these trees, right? We know from making bouchées and for people that are foodies, you can cook sugar, and the longer that you cook the sugar, the more that it caramelizes and it starts to change different. And so I call this the confectionaire's sugar process, where it's white sugar or it's honey, and then it continues as you cook it. It gets darker and darker. We're cooking those sugars in the tree, just like you are when you're cooking your honey on the stove making a bouchée. And so the longer that the staves have been exposed to the fire, and or the higher temperatures, they can expose it for a longer period of time at a lower temperature, or they can turn the temps up and expose it, a lesser period of time. And each of the coopers, by the way, have their own magic recipe of how they do this, and that's why everybody's barrels taste somewhat different. But as you toast it, a very light toast, you haven't really put a lot of heat to the wood, and you haven't driven that heat deep inside your piece of wood. And so you've cooked the sugars, the lipids inside that tree, different than if you have a medium plus or a heavy toast. So you can have the same tree, the same species, but with the different toast levels, you're going to have different flavor profiles, and you're going to then also have a different nose with each of the different toast levels. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah?
Yeah. Let's see. Jaden is asking if oak is generally reusable. He imagines it wouldn't be potent over.
Outside of that piece of toasted wood. Generally, they say, like if you had a 6-gallon carboy that you were going to oak, if you were going to take, you would want to take between 2 and 3 ounces, generally is the manufacturer's suggestion, and add those 2 or 3 ounces to your 6-gallon carboy, and they say that generally maximum saturation, meaning you've gotten all the way into the inside of these different pieces of wood, generally takes 3 or 4 months. And so can you reuse an oak? Yeah, especially if you didn't soak it in for a long time. But, I have some bourbon barrels that I put my stuff in. And, boy, the very first time you pour the bourbon out of your barrel and put a mead in there, it's got a big presence of the bourbon and a very big presence of the barrel component as well. But after you've used that barrel for 4 or 5 batches, you've kind of, at least in the small amount of time that I've been using barrels, you've kind of shot that barrel out. It's pretty much given up the ghost, so to speak. And so if you are going to continue to get more out of it, you probably have to rely on a longer soak session to try to extract it out. And I expect at some point you're not going to be able really to get anything more out of your wood. So you can reuse it to a point until it's gone, until it's given up the ghost.
I guess.
Do you have more?
I guess you go by taste, right?
Sure. Yeah.
If you're not getting anything out of it the second time around, I guess you need more of something new.
Mm-hmm. And maybe. So I kind of used to use some of my older stuff, and then I would add some more fresh to it, and so kind of like you're always adding a little more to it. And I think, I don't know, a while back I kind of stopped doing that, and I started paying more attention of how long, in other words, start with a fresh batch of oak from the beginning where none of it has been in your must, and pay attention to how long you've been using that. So that's generally kind of how I do it now. And by the way, when it's all done and said, and your oak's no good anymore, it's great to put on the barbecue when you're putting steaks and stuff on the barbecue. It adds a lot of nice smoky notes for that too. Yeah.
That would be really interesting. We're gonna have to see what happens if you throw some of those in the smoker.
You want to know something I learned a long time ago? If you take corn on the cob and eat the corn and save the cob, and you let that cob dry out, and then you put that cob on the fire, and of course you want to have a water bottle so you can squirt it down from time to time so it don't go up in flames and explode, because you really want it to smoke. But corn cobs dried out taste a lot like oak chips that the big dogs like to use in their barbecue cook-offs and stuff. Try it sometime. Yeah, try it. So we've talked about how the different toast levels impact our wood, and there's 3 reasons why. Basically, there's 3 components in any kind of an oak. One is tannins, the other one is lipids, and then the third is hemicellulose. And so the tannins are actually a lignin, and those particular tannins will add structure. In other words, we talked about making something kind of chewy. I think it makes a good backbone for traditionals, and it seems to support the honey in a way that if it's not there, and some of these things probably people won't understand the language, or you might have to stretch to kind of put it together in your head. But I think with some experience, maybe you would learn to use some different words. But it adds some structure or some backbone, and it will also add some grip and some astringency. And So you've got the lignans, which give you the structure of the tannins. It'll also add some vanillin, which is the same ingredient that comes from the bean of the orchid plant, vanilla. And it's the very same chemical, actually. But just like if you were to throw in vanilla beans in your primary, the yeast will assimilate the vanilla and you won't get any vanilla notes out of your beans. The same thing happens if you throw in your oak up front, and you're looking for, first say you want to get some coconut and some vanilla notes and that lower end of the sugar spectrum. Those will get eaten up for the most part in primary, and then the tannins also add some smokiness and some spice. So you get structure from different oaks, and some of them will add more structure than others. And then we move on to aroma. Some oaks will add more or less aroma than other oaks, and won't really change the flavor profile that much. Although that's a hard thing that I have a problem with, is trying to divide up. Am I experiencing this because I'm smelling it or because I'm tasting it? Right? It's kind of one and the same to some degree. And then lastly, we have the sugar in there, the hemicellulose, and so that's the cooked wood sugars, and so that starts out as vanilla and coconut, and then it'll kind of move to, as you cook it longer, those sugars get cooked more, and it'll turn into kind of caramel notes, butterscotch, and then as it gets even darker and darker, it'll move up to like fun and creme brulee and those kinds of more of a cooked sugar spiciness thing, and then it's also the hemicellulose that adds the body, mouthfeel to our meads.
Okay. We've got...
Any questions do we have questions for what we've covered so far?
Yeah, Joe's asking about toast levels, if we're talking about varying time, varying temperatures, or both to differentiate.
Yes. That's, yes, there are different toast levels, and different toast levels do different things to these three different components that are in the wood. In other words, if you were to take and toast something at 300 degrees, those temps will caramelize the wood sugars, and they'll cause it to, you'll get the caramel and the butterscotch and maybe some mocha aromas. Now, if you take that same piece of wood and you exposed it to a 420 degree temperature, it's now cooked these sugars more, and so then that starts to turn that same piece of wood, the flavor nuances and the nose that you're going to get will turn to kind of a smoky, toasty kind of thing, maybe some spicy notes, and then eventually all the way up to, it'll smell like campfire and roasted coffee and those types of things. So when they're toasted at a lower level, that's going to leave more tannins in the wood, and that'll add for some more structure, and you're going to taste the wood itself. Like if you ever cut down an oak tree, you're going to know that it smells pretty good, and it almost smells edible right there on its own accord. And so the lower toast, you'll have that wood and the coconut, and then as you move up higher, we start to get to those more spicy, clovey, leather, coffee kind of notes. And
I think we've just been joined by Manny.
We have.
Hi, Manny.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Finally here.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Manny, we were just talking about how different temperatures, when we toast oaks, different temperatures will cook the sugars in the oaks more or less, and that kind of changes the profile from lower level nuances to wood and coconut, caramel, butterscotch, and then it moves all the way up to kind of spicy, leather, coffee. Also, too, some of the oaks will have some, particularly French oak. And for our listeners, we're gonna talk about the difference between American, Hungarian, and French here in just a minute. So don't get nervous that we're missing out on how they're different and what you would use them for. But at a lower level, the French oaks will what's the word I want to look for? It'll kind of accentuate